You and the agenda.
You didn't save it.
Yeah, I saved everything.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
That's just nuts.
See, I was gonna get that thing up. Can you print it? Can you send it to print?
We do have quorum present. We have 3 in chamber, and we have Commissioner Smith via Zoom. And there's a possibility. My apologies. Let me just say again, we do have a quorum present. We have 3 commissioners in chamber, and we have 1 commissioner, Commissioner Smith via Zoom. There is a possibility that Commissioner Shanefield could Zoom in here shortly. Also, I would like to let the other commissioners know that Commissioner Smith will need to leave before the meetings gets over with. So if he happens to leave Zoom, we're aware of that. With that, I would ask if you'd please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then following the Pledge of Allegiance, we'll have a moment of silence. And as we have our moment of silence, I would like to just mention that you take a special moment for a fellow co-worker whose son experienced a injury last week, and our prayers need to go to him and to the co-worker's family. So first of all, join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moment of silence. And let me clarify for that coworker, that tragedy was not, was an injury, severe injury that we hope he recovers and recovers very well from. But our prayers are out to that family as well as the individual, that his recovery is speedy and well. With that, commissioners, we have 1 agenda item, and that's the budget and strategic planning. With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I shall move.
So moved by Commissioner Lloyd to approve the agenda. Is there a second?
I will second.
Second by Commissioner Toman. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Also at this time, commissioners, I would entertain a motion to rescind Robert's Rules of Order.
I so move.
So moved by Commissioner Lloyd to rescind Robert's Rules of Orders. Is there a second?
I second that.
Second by Commissioner Toman. Is further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
I
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, with that, I'll turn the floor over to Commissioner Lloyd. I'd like to also let the commissioners know that our deputy attorney, Mr. De Leon, is also with us via Zoom. Good afternoon, John. Okay, Commissioner Lloyd.
Thank you, Chairman Wendling. Yeah, today our purpose is twofold, is to take a look at the form our committee has worked on. I feel really comfortable with what we're going to present to you today regarding the form. I do want to thank our committee, which has been Bonnie Berry and Christina Marshall, John De Leon, Commissioner Toman, and myself. I think one of this goal that we and this what we were tasked with was kind of twofold, and we're going to attack one fold at the beginning of the meeting and go hit twofold at the second part of this meeting. And that was number one, create a new concept of outside entities to share information to us. And a couple of the tasks were in a more easier format to use. And talking to Treasurer Barry, Bonnie Barry, the old form had basically been just a conglomeration of questions commissioners wanted over the years, and it just become extremely long. And this one may end up being just as long, but I think the questions are really focused to allow a couple of things. Number one, to provide us base information to make decisions regarding organizations and the ones we're funding, to get a better look at how they meet statute, but by providing services to the county. And then just taking a look at some of the innate questions that would help us make decisions regarding funding. Part two in that task was to create an easier format, which we have. Part three would be one of the last things we will do, and that would be make this to a spreadsheet that can be comparable. But before I think we get to that stage, we need to make sure this is the format we want to use, and we can take that next big step. And then the second piece of the puzzle was to create a grant scoring method. And we're going to talk about some proposals I have with that after we take a look at the form. I was able to get each of the commissioners the form yesterday. And I want to thank Bonnie for being the one that organized our group's thoughts. She took what was really a crazy spreadsheet that I had made and made it a lot more functional. So I really thank Bonnie in that part. So I think the best way to attack this would be to simply walk through it all with the intentions of the questions. And I do know Chairman Wendling had made a comment in an email to us as a group that he did have one recommendation. And so anybody that has recommendations or ideas, this is our chance to mold it. And this is why I've kept you involved in this situation as we've gone through. So is everyone okay if we just take a look going through the form that way?
Sounds good. Just a point of order is Miss Barry is our accountant for the county. I don't believe Mr. Barbudo has left the treasurer's office.
Thank you.
Mr. Lloyd.
And that's not wishful thinking or anything, Treasurer Barbudo. It's just a slip. So and I don't think Bonnie Barry wants to be our treasurer either very well. So
But just a point of order. So we don't, we'll help each other out. But we don't need a new treasurer at this point in time, please.
Man, that's going to be in the Star tomorrow, isn't it? All right, just teasing David Martin. Okay. All right. So the first, of course, is your base information, name of organization, who the contact, email, phone numbers are. We then have amount of funding requests from Sweetwater County for fiscal year 2023. So what are they asking for this year? And then we get into it. And one of the things I like about this form is that we've done is we've based it in subcategories. So it reads a little bit better and flows better. So the first subcategory is organization, mission, and services. What is your organization's mission? We just want to know what they provide, what they do in Sweetwater County. Number two, what services do you provide in the county that no other organization provides? What makes you unique? This is a question to kind of check for duplication, but also to make sure, hey, this is what we do, know what they do, and what makes them unique to why we should fund them. Number three is please list all the services or programs your organization provides, the amount of your funding request you will use for the specified service program, and the measurable goal outcomes of the service program. So this is kind of a trifold question. One of the things we want to look at, and an example I'll use in this is Ywca. When we fund the Ywca, we're actually funding three big programs within the Ywca. We're funding their financial literacy program, their day care program, but we're also funding their safe, their abuse task force, the safe house, sorry, I'm stumbling over myself. I'll catch up, but so we want to break it down rather than say, hey, we need $300,000 from the county, and they don't ask for that. We want them to break it down that, hey, we're asking for $300,000, but $120,000 is going to go to daycare. $100,000 is going to go to financial literacy, and the last $80,000 is going to go to the safe house and those projects. We want to know that. So if we think one program's better, more of a need than other, it helps it goes out. So we want to know how much for each of their areas they're going to be spending on, to break it down a little bit individually. And then the second thing is something new. what is your measurable outcome goals? And we're not going to use this as a measure every year of, hey, you don't get money because you didn't meet your goals. But we want to put some accountability on the places we're giving money and to be able to say, so if we give you this money to provide this service, what's your goal? What are you hoping to provide to our community and our constituents? And then next year when they come back, we could use that. Hey, did you actually meet a goal? Did you increase your services 15%? Did you find you needed a new service line? And I think that's will help organizations grow, but it provides some accountability. Number 4.
Excuse me, Commissioner.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, let's just stop for a second. Just look at page 1.
Okay.
If you don't mind, and
Yeah.
just kind of see if I know Commissioner Toman had a big part in this, but since putting it together, do you have any questions about it? You're pretty good with it.
Well, my computer screen is blipped out on me. So did you get a chance to print that?
I did
or-
try to print it, but it did not.
Here, it didn't print. Let me see if I can print it for you, Commissioner.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I need to see if I can get this to T.
It should be there right now. Okay, we've got it for you, Commissioner. It's printing, yes. Did it work?
Thank you. Yeah. I
All righty,
appreciate that.
very
I don't-
good.
I don't know what happened to
All
my
right, you go ahead and look it over. I know you're part of it, but Commissioner Smith, did you have any questions on the first page?
Everything looking good so far to me.
You know, and was there, you know, if you happen to have to get off before we get done and there's a page we haven't gotten to that you have any questions, please stop us and intervene before you go, please.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to look and no, Commissioner's not here. So Commissioner Lloyd, was there any conversation within your group about when you know, I enjoy measurable outcomes and goals, but was there any talk about providing data of working towards or meeting those goals? Or would that be something we'd want to put on for next year because giving them an opportunity to use this the first time? Your thoughts?
Yeah, we actually have had that conversation, Chairman Wendling, and the conversation, I think, then kind of goes above this committee with either maybe a continuation of this committee or a new committee of saying, what's the follow-up we want when they're reporting within the contracts? And those are conversations we've had with also Attorney De Leon is, do we want to change some of the reporting criterion? And that as we go through the year, Chairman Wendling, but we just haven't got there as we've been just trying to nail down what the initial form and ask questions were.
All right, well, let's, if I would ask that Ms. Berry might make a note with regard to question 3 for next year, that we have the conversation as we move forward as commissioners, if that's something we want for that part of number 3 for the future, because I can see, all right, here, we're going to write goals, maybe for the first time, who knows? And here's the measurements. Then I think it'd be fair the following years to say, hey, what data do you have to support that you're working towards those goals with county revenue?
And
I mean, that's just my thought.
No,
doesn't have to be if you think.
actually, and I think Chairman Wendling, I think as we talk a little bit about when we get to the scoring and why I think that's difficult. I think this is really going to become an evolving system. And I think what's going to happen is after we do it this year, we're going to sit back at the table and say, what do we need to tweak? And I think one of the things we can tweak, definitely, and I agree that we should tweak, is what are your measurable outcomes, goals, but how did you meet them last year? And I do think we could tie that into some reporting potentially down the road.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. Anybody else have questions on page 1?
Or thoughts. If anybody
thoughts?
thinks differently than what I've said, please say so. It's fine. Just a thought I threw out there, being an old educator.
I knew you would like outcomes, Doc.
Thank you. Rubrics too.
So we'll get to that soon. Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and go on to the second page then. Question number 4. How would the services programs your organization provides change if your organization received a reduction in funding? And then we broke it down to a 10, 30, and 50. But we did note in there, please focus on services rather than the direct number of staff affected. And we know as you reduce staff, services could be affected, but we want to know what impacts it's going to have on your mission if we cut you 10, 30, or 50. And I think that's a good piece of information to have as you look at what are the most important services we're funding and how is it going to affect the community. I think having that information is really helps us drive decisions. Number 5, how many county residents did your organization serve in March of 2017, 19, and 22? We picked one solid month, so there was, and we figure we usually turn this in around March. We can change that date if need be, if we're getting it out and wanting it sooner. But the concept is how widespread and what are the number, and we know not the most important thing may not be the total number of people served, but we want to know how many residents your services are impacting. And we want to see that in a trend over a few year period. And then we also gave a spot of like, explain any significant changes. You know, if we were asking this in a different year, people that were, a great example of this would be both of our senior centers. Their numbers of people served drastically went down during the COVID pandemic because their doors weren't open and they weren't providing the inside meals or doing the community activities. So we want to give people an opportunity to say, hey, this is what's caused our numbers to adjust. And then the next section is organizational financial information. And this is kind of, we used to have like 4 ledgers in there. And what I did is I told Bonnie, like, she's our ledger person. She's the one that understands the finances. Put the ledger information in there that you feel you need to be able to help us guide us. And this is what was came up with. The balance sheet as of March 31st, cash and investments, all other assets, total liabilities, total equity, then an income statement, do not include any cash carryover for 21, 22, 22, 22, and 23, including our funding, all other revenues, total expenses, and net income. Number 6, how many days cash on hand? And we actually gave the formula of cash on hand. And Bonnie says, because she gets a lot of questions of people not understanding what that means. And then that's the question there. So, and then number 7, then we'll take a break, Doc, and ask for questions at the bottom of this page. What is your organization's sustainability plan? And we may have to explain that out, but we kind of want to know, and you'll see when you follow up with question 8, it kind of ties into this. So even though it's at the next page, I do want to share what 8 is, because I think it ties. What plans does your organization have in place to continue providing services with a reduction in county funding? We want to know 2 things. A, that you're planning for the future, and if we can't fund, what you're looking at and what other options you're looking at outside of county funding. And we want to know how you're going to sustain that. And what are your thought processes? Because we've been telling people for ages, hey, our finances are going down. And even though the projections are a little better this year, we've been seeing a decline. What are you doing to plan to work with that also? So that's what those 7 and 8 mean. So I'll take a stop here, Doc, with page 2 and ask if anyone has any questions on page 2, questions, ideas, other input, things we're missing.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Smith, anything on page 2? If you're still there.
So far, so good for me.
Okay, Commissioner Tolman, as you have time to since it's been put out, anything for you?
Well, let's go through the plan. I think we had talked about maybe having some of the agencies kind of go through the plan maybe and give us some feedback. Are you still looking at doing something like that?
Yeah, I think if we get through this form, then we can talk about what next steps, but I do think that's a possibility, Mary, that we have people run through the form to see the viability. And when we talk about scoring, we'll talk a little bit about that too, because I think there's some variables here also. So.
All right. Thank you. Good point. Yeah. I got a couple questions. It's just a couple of things that caught my eye, and you can help me understand them. Under number 5, you've got March 2017, March 2019, or 2019, 2017, and then 2022. Significance, why every other year and then 3 years?
we thought rather than having him tell us every number for 5 years, we just kind of spread it out to 3 to reduce the
Okay.
amount of information. We were also worried a little bit about some of the organization's ability to produce that number.
Sure.
And so we kind of wanted to hit spotlights in time rather than just 5 consecutive years.
All right, very good. Under organization, when I first looked at it, I was trying to look at it from a standpoint of not only understanding it from the first time, but also if I were outside agency or something, balance sheet, cash and investments, all other assets, and then total assets. And you have all other revenues in the next box, and then total revenues. What's the difference between, first of all other assets and then total assets? Can you give me a couple examples or one example of each?
Mr. Chairman, can I have Bonnie Berry come up and speak on
Thank you,
that?
Bonnie.
Because she's kind of the creator of this portion.
Sure.
Yes, so the all other assets, if you see above that, it has cash and investment. So I specifically wanted to know the amount of their cash and investments that they had
Okay.
on those dates. And then, so all of their assets is under that. And then your total assets would just be the total of your cash and investments plus all other assets
Okay,
equals
very good.
total assets. And then the same thing with your revenues. I wanted them to break out the Sweetwater County funding revenues, all other revenues, and then the total revenues is just the sum of the Sweetwater County funding plus all other revenues equals
Yeah.
total revenues.
All right. Then one last question, and this was the one I emailed that I would wait until tonight to get a sense for, is what is, okay, you got reserves, you got cash on hand. Number 7 question is, what is your organization's sustainability plan? Is that reflective of what their, for lack of better words, what is their strategic plan for their reserves? I mean, cash carryover is one thing, but reserves, was there any conversation about that? Or is it somewhere further down and I missed it?
We do hit some reserve questions and some foundation questions and cash on hand type questions a little farther ahead, Doc.
Okay.
What we were really hoping from this question is we want to know that organizations are looking at options of being funded outside of the county. And we want to know, what is your plan? And I mean, honestly, I think every organization has to have a plan of the what ifs. And, you know, I was talking to an organization we don't fund that's seen as a nonprofit, a fairly large, a fairly important one in Rock Springs. And they've taken a significant hit in their local funders, the city council, other entities that provided funding. So they've had to look at more fundraising events. They've had to look at membership dues differently. So we kind of want to know people are looking at what other options are out there.
Yeah, I'd like to know what sustainability for them, what their plan is, i.e. if they're getting significant money from us and we tell them, hey, in 3 years, we would like you to be more self-sufficient. So what's the plan for? So I think
Exactly.
that fits under sustainability. So I'll hold off with my reserve question and see if it fits under one of the other pages. Okay.
And if not, we'll figure out where to put that in,
That's
because I
all.
think that's a good
Yeah,
question, Doc.
Yeah, I was just looking. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Any other input? All right. We'll jump to question 9. What does your organization have in place to continue providing services without county funding, which actually ties into this a little bit? Why is your organization requesting funding from the county? And I know some of this gets redundant, but we want to know, why are you coming to us? Why haven't you looked at other options? What other options have you looked at? And that ties into 11. What other funding sources has your organization looked into and or attempted to obtain?
Very good.
When we hit the next section, Sweetwater County assistance, what was the amount of your organization's award from the county last year? Not what you requested last year, what we gave you. Is your organization housed in a county-owned building? Yes or no? Is the county paying for your organization, utilities for your organization? Is the county providing internet, computer services to your organization, maintenance, snow removal, maintenance, snow removal for your organization? I think we can clean that up. And cleaning services. We'll just have to clean that up on the form. I didn't notice that until now. Does your organization participate in the county's health plan? Yes or no? And if And if yes, are the contribution amounts paid by your organization's employees the same as those paid by the county employees? The reason we're asking these questions is if we want to know what the actual in-kind donation is, we can ask Gene. He usually has that information. But I think it's important to know what other organizations are getting hidden, not hidden, but outside secondary benefits from the county, whether it's using our building, are we providing cleaning services for you? What are those in-kind donations that we're providing to you? Because really, for some organizations, that's a large amount. I know there's one outside organization that we fund. But the estimate of in-kind donations is almost $240,000 to $260,000 a year. And so I think that's an important thing as we look at how we're helping people, because we don't only help people with financial parts of their budget, we help them with other options too. And that even leads indirectly to number 18. Is your organization currently receiving a pass-through grant sponsored, managed, assisted by the county? Because that's another way. We have grant people that get grants that we may be co-sponsoring or helping assist, or Christina assisted in the process if she has time. We want to know what those specific grants are and the amount of those grants. And we want people to also kind of look at it to say, man, there are some hidden benefits to what we're already getting outside of those dollars. So since that ends us on a page, I will turn it over to you, Chairman Wendling, to see if there's any questions from the group.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions? Question 7 on page 2 through question, I'll just say 18 on page 3. Commissioners? I see Commissioner Smith is gone, so it's the 3 of us.
Okay.
Any questions, Mrs. Mary? Commissioner?
No, I think
Good
I'm
with that?
okay so far.
Yeah, I would like to comment that I really like the delving into the in-kind and that type where you're looking at the county assistance, because it's always a question that comes up as we go through budget. And I'll guarantee you, whoever the commissioner is that brings it up is looked at as where they're not supporting that outside agency or something. And I'm glad to see it's now black and white where everybody has to answer it, and it's there, and we all can see it. So the in-kind services, Commissioner Smith or Commissioner Tolman and Commissioner Lloyd working with Bonnie and Christina is excellent. When you speak about grants, you hit the nail on the head. It's not only the money they receive, but how much time does our grants writer put in for these entities that isn't figured in the bill? We just go ahead and pay. So that's a good point. So thank you for your work there and your due diligence in looking at that. So I have no questions there. I think you picked up on a few things that it's a matter of cleaning up and proofreading. So
Yeah.
We're good to go. The floor is yours.
All right, so we'll go to question 19. Does your organization have a foundation or receive money from a foundation? If so, how much money does the foundation have? How much of it's restricted? How much of it's unrestricted? And once again, Bonnie provided a formula to make it easier to answer that question. The reason I think this question is important is last year we did really take a hard delve in to organizations' cash on hands, but we found out some of the organizations didn't have as much cash on hand because their foundation may have had that money. So we kind of want to make sure that's a little equivalent and look and see how that also plays a part of the picture. Then we get into the next section, which is other assistance, which is other assistance we may provide. Does your organization participate in the Wyoming retirement system? If so, does the organization pay the employees' portion? If the organization pays some of the employees' portion, but not at all, please explain the split. And does your organization anticipate receiving grant funding not managed, assisted by the county? So we want to recognize that the majority of grants that some of these organizations get won't be pass-through grants. They may be grants on their own. So we also want to know what other grant funding they're getting out there and the grant and their amount. And then it goes to question 22, which is our employee section. How much does your director make? How much does your director receive in annual bonuses? And then, is your organization proposing any wage increases for the year? If so, what's the percentage and dollar amount? If yes, what percentage and dollar amount will come from county funding? And the reason, some of these questions are being asked based upon historical stuff. And one of those pieces was there was a situation once where we cut organizations back 2% because if they were giving funding. And some of those organizations received minimal funding and most of the raises weren't coming out of funding. So we kind of want to know where that's coming out for county funding. We do know there's a danger to that because there could be shell gaming going on with moving one money to move the other, but we kind of want to ask that question. And how much in wage salary increases due to promotions and longevity does your organization anticipate this year? And then one of the things, the next question, 26, how many full-time employees did your organization have in March of 2017, 19, and 22? Please explain any significant changes. And the reason we're asking, and we at 26 and 27 are mere questions. One is full-time employees, one is part-time employees. We at the county have made significant changes in numbers of employees through attrition and not hiring position. We want to see what other organizations are doing. We want to know what your census in 17, 19, and 22 is, and we want to look at what efficiencies you're making. And then we do provide on 26 and 27 the opportunity to explain any significant changes. So with that being said, those are our last questions, Mr. Chairman. So any questions on the last page?
No, not for me, Commissioner Toman.
Not on the last page, but other assistance, 21. I would just say, does your organization anticipate receiving grant or other funding not managed assisted by the county? Because someone might get some money, but it's not really a grant.
Okay.
And under foundations, under 19, does your organization have a foundation or receive money from a foundation? Because I know of groups that receive money from a foundation, but they don't have a foundation. But is that covering it with the yes or no?
I never really, as we
Because they're
went
not
through,
going to be able to say if they're getting the money from another foundation, they're not going to be able to say that ABC.
I think, Mary, that might be, Commissioner Tillman, that might be something they would report maybe under if we open up that question on 21 of other funding. Because to me, if you're getting money from a foundation that's not yours, that might be more grant-based or gift-based. So I think that could be encompassed a little bit by wording on 21.
Okay. And then I had on page 1, I thought we were going to ask them the question if their organization was statutorily, if it had a statutory responsibility to the county.
And I think as a group, we decided we knew those statutory requirements and we didn't think it needed to be asked on the form. Does that sound right, Bonnie, with a yes or no?
I
Because
think it should still be answered because you have some that we're merely giving them a donation. Others kind of have some statutory. I think they still should say under the mission there's somewhere define if statutory, if there's a statutory requirement. I still would like to know that one.
And I think maybe the way we can handle that is if we expand the sheet that Bonnie created that said, here are the ones that we're required to fund and why. Maybe we could move away from that by expanding that sheet, because I don't think everyone, even some of our outside organizations, even understand if they're statutorily required. But we could take a look at that and maybe just add that sheet as our information piece to help provide that information. What does everyone else think?
Yeah, the thing, I see it both ways. If you're on the commission long enough and after a while, it takes a while to begin to understand, but if you're a new commissioner to the system, the first couple of years is very difficult and you begin to wonder what is, what's an essential, which is basically, if it's essential, it's statutory. So what is essential to certain organizations, what's statutorily required? I think finding the right wording, I wouldn't use essential because there's services out there that believe they're essential when they're not. I know where Commissioner Tolman's coming from because I experienced that. I'm shameful to say I didn't pick up on that as quickly as many have. But also I understand as a new commissioner, it would important to know which ones are partially by statute funded, based on statutes. You
And I-
know,
And that makes a lot of sense, Chairman. I think what Bonnie had created a form that basically outlined every outside agency and component unit we funded. And actually, we broke it down on that form of this is we're required to pay because of statute. And so maybe that cover page could even go with this to the commissioners to have an understanding and to develop that. And maybe even as a tool, we should be giving the new commissioners so they know that from the beginning. Because some of the other information that was included in that form that Bonnie made that we abridged that day were which organizations could actually be eligible for mill funding through their own mill that currently are or currently aren't. We educated ourselves that day that there's a recent law change when we have this discussion that actually senior centers can become a mill levy district. So we even actually outlined in there what organizations receive mill levies and which organizations don't but can. So maybe expanding that list is probably really important just to educate people, because it does take a while to figure out. And it's still tricky because if you look at like the events complex, we're only statutorily required for a portion of what we provide to them. So it does tricky. So what if we try to expand that tool and see if that meets our needs?
yeah, I think I'm sitting here trying to think right now, and Miss Barry's sitting with us, and I think when we hit into our component units, most of them, if I know all of them, when you hit like public health, that's a component unit, is that correct? Okay, they're funded by the county.
Mhm.
But the other component units, i.e. fence complex, the hospital, Southwest Counseling, and I think whatever else is listed as a component unit, it's signified by being supported by some statute dollars. I think anybody receiving funding that's listed as an outside agency, are there any of those that were statutorily required to fund any portion of or all of, Monty? Do you know? I don't think so. Come on up, please.
We are statutorily required to fund Title 25, which the hospital
Which
does
is
make a request for.
Hospital,
Yes,
and they're part of our component unit, right?
they are, but the Title 25 portion is actually funded through the general fund, not the mill levy.
Very good.
Their mill levy portion is to fund their hospital maintenance, and we are required to fund
Yep.
hospital maintenance because they are Sweetwater
Thank you.
County Memorial Hospital. Most of the statutory requirements for outside agencies, we don't request the funding request forms from. So for example, we have to pay, there's some attorney fees that we have to pay to the state. So that's statutorily required, and we just get a bill from the state once a year, but they don't fill out a form. Guardian ad litem, they don't
Public
fill out a form.
defenders.
The public defender is what I was referring to. So there are situations like that where we're not required to. For the most part, the outside agencies that fill out the funding request forms, there are no statutory requirements for those. The component units there are. However, as Commissioner Lloyd mentioned, a lot of them provide more services than are statutorily required. For example, he mentioned the events complex. We are required to fund a county fair. We are not necessarily required to fund an events complex. So there's situations like that where the component units, there is a statutory requirement or supporting a statutory requirement, but it's not necessarily everything they provide that is a
So would
statutory requirement.
Would it be fair to say a component unit that fills these forms out, some portion of them would be or all, in some cases, would be funded statutorily?
Yes.
Outside agencies, other than those that Guardian ad litem and the ones that we know of that don't fill out the form.
The only one I can think of off of the top of my head, I have to double check the list to make sure. But the only one I can think of is the Title 25 statutory requirement with the hospital. That's the only one that I can think of that actually fills out the
Fills out the
form.
form.
The rest of them, I just put in the numbers
Put in-
based on my best estimate. We also have like MOUs, contracts. Those are ones also like the Sweetwater Medics historically has not filled out the form because we had a long-term contract with them. So that I would just put in the amount of the contract. So they would not fill out a form. And then same thing with the that MOU with the fire that we pay $12,000 a year. They don't fill out a form. It's, I don't know if it's an MOU or a mutual aid agreement or something.
It's
where I
mutual
just
aid
put
with
in the
Carbon
amount.
County.
Yes.
Very good.
So that's what we have. But for the most part, though,
Does that
the
help you?
outside agencies that fill out the forms, it's going to be a no. They're not,
You
they
know.
don't have a statutory requirement except Title 25 with the hospital.
What about Sweetwater Counseling?
That's Southwest Counseling. They are a
Southwest Counseling.
component unit. And there are no statutory obligations with it. The reason they're a component unit, it's a support to statutory obligations. We are required to pay Title 25, and they help mitigate some of the Title 25 costs. So there's not a statutory obligation there, but it's a support. It's a support situation to lower our Title 25 costs. That way, all of these patients aren't just being sent directly to the hospital where we're paying Title 25
Yeah.
costs.
In that case, I think some of those component units should be filling this out, even if we have a contract with them.
All of the component units
They
do fill
do
them
fill
out.
this out.
Yes.
Okay, okay. And I think when we do that comparison spreadsheet, you had already talked about breaking them into like the ones you have to pay versus
Mhm.
the component units versus the outside entity. So that's where you could probably sort it out for the commissioners, at least when we do that comparison.
Yes.
I think just listening to what you have to say and what may be coming for more worksheets, I think that'll work itself out almost black and white
Yeah.
for all of us
Yeah.
and remove many doubts as we have those conversations. I think it's moving in the right direction based on what it was, and I thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank the committee.
That's all I had. Any other questions regarding Commissioner Tolman along those lines for Ms. Berry?
I think we just need to work through the process. It's still, it still seems to me that it's 3 pages of 29 questions, but I would, I would lump some of them together, but I would say let's go
It's-
forth and see where Commissioner Lloyd wants to take it with, maybe field testing it with some of the entities maybe. Because some of the questions, just having been in another entity, I would find them still, I would still find them to be confusing to answer. But I think maybe we should just turn it back to Mr. Lloyd and you maybe to field test it a little bit.
Well, and we have discussed making an instruction sheet to instruct on how to answer these questions. And I'm a person of examples. I love examples. So maybe we can do instructions along with a dummy outside agency and answer the questions. Cause that's how, rather than just reading a description of how I'm supposed to answer this question, sometimes it helps me if I can actually see an example of it. So that's something we can talk about more in our committee.
It'll
if we
be a
want to.
living document.
It will.
And what I might suggest, Commissioner Lloyd and the committee is at the bottom of these sheets in the either corner, or is it whenever it's updated, a date?
Okay.
And
Just
page
like that.
numbers. And page.
I was
Hold your
planning on
page.
doing page numbers when I actually convert it into a fillable PDF.
Yeah.
But I think
So yes, but I will definitely, I was gonna do page numbers. I didn't even think of a date, but we can do a
yeah, I think
date.
because every time we
Update date.
update dates so everybody knows, or revised, whatever word you want to use.
Okay.
Whatever
And that way
works
people
for you.
don't keep one in their drawer and say, oh, I got one from last year and I have
Yeah.
new questions. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. But I think it's a great start. I love the idea. It's a living and growing document. I think it wouldn't take long to have 2 or 3 different outside entities. You don't have to have them all, 1 or 2, to look through it, and say, hey, what are we missing, or or that, and we can combine as we go along. So just because we move forward after day doesn't mean some point in time we can continue work. Okay? Very good.
And I
Okay.
had, I just had one comment about
Sure.
your reserve. I don't know if you were trying to get at, like, if they have reserves saved for something, is that what
Yeah,
you were
I'm
getting
wondering,
at?
my
Because
my
we
question,
didn't ask
my
anything like
question
that
would
in
be
here.
like, if you have reserves,
Why do you have so much if you have
well, not,
400?
I don't
base?
care how much you have.
Okay, what are they
Basic,
reserved for?
what are these reserves planned for?
Okay,
If it's a
And-
county building and somebody says a roof,
got it.
We at one time.
We discussed this, but
Yeah.
it never made it on our sheet.
Yeah,
but
we
I do
actually had
remember having
discussed this of, and I think what
discussion.
happened is the form changed. We didn't bring it back in and that was our fault, my fault for not
are
seeing
you
it. But
okay
they,
with that though?
but yeah, I know because one of the questions we wanted to ask is, if you have a lot of cash on hand, why? You know, why do you have so much in reserves? Maybe there, you know, and our example to that, we actually even talked about an example about that in our committee was Golden Hour and how they go from really September to January, through December, for beginning of September through 31st with really no grant funding. And the only way they can provide meals to people is by going into their reserves and cash on hand. So we want people to explain why they have so much.
And until they explain that to us, what the reserves are planned for,
Yes,
nobody knew.
Well, maybe just
Exactly.
put in parentheses purpose or something, reserves, and then purpose question mark or something.
I think it has to be clear, so there's nobody that can weasel of what it's for, because I go back to what you had made the comment with regard to this will be a shell game for somebody. It can't be a shell
No.
game
I agree.
because that's not good for anybody.
What page is that?
And I think that's what we have to watch for, is to make sure
Exactly.
people aren't shell gaming. And I think the thing too with that, Doc, is the other example is if people are saying they're going to have a plan, and my example to this would be Star Bus. They had a large reserve because they want to use that grant to find another building. But what is the time frame you're going to do that? Because it's in one of the comments Bonnie made in our meeting was they've been talking about that building for a long time. You know, like, hey, our goal is in the next 3 years to have this much money to get into a building, not we want to use this grant to get into the building. We want to know the act of planning. And Star Bus's answer could have been, hey, we were really hoping to get into the maintenance building if you guys built Lagoon Road. So now we're going to be looking at other buildings and here's our time frame, because it's easy to say, hey, we're saving for this. We want to know when the action is going to also help.
I agree.
And one other thing I want to tie into when Bonnie was talking about organizations and funding, the other thing to remember too, and we may have hit this and I may have missed it, was our joint powers boards. I don't think they fill out forms, do they, Bonnie? It just goes through their contracts and the current MOUs.
Actually, they do.
Okay.
There is, I don't believe there is a statutory
Yeah.
obligation to do it, but there is that joint powers board agreement, and
They-
those ones, they do fill out the forms.
For the most part, airport boards come before us, so has joint
Mhm.
communications.
Yes,
We haven't had the joint waters board because
we don't fund them.
they're self-funding,
Yes, we
We
do
don't
not
give them
fund
any
We
money,
don't give them
so-
any money.
but they've got to post their budget with us, don't they?
Right, but that's, well, they might have to, they either have to have it available or they have to give it
But
to
we
the
have
clerk to have it
No,
available. But no, the reason they don't fill out a funding request form is because we don't fund them any money.
you know,
So
money.
why would they?
So, and then, of course, the new one coming in is the joint telecommunications, which I believe is broadband.
And we've never funded them any money either.
No, but that may be new as that
Right.
moves forward, right? Okay, so those are our joint boards,
Mhm.
power boards at this point in
Yes.
time.
Yes, so those ones do fill out forms. They are not statutorily required in the sense that they are joint powers boards. But they do fill out forms and we do provide them money. It's according to the split in the joint powers
There's-
board agreement.
Joint powers board agreement.
Well, that provides more accountability from all of those entities to fill out the form.
Well, it provides accountability, but keep in mind, thank God the water board's self-funding. I'll just say that, the joint water board, but any one of them based on their MOUs, airport, joint communications, water board, and now telecommunications. Based on the MOU, there's no oversight on an open checkbook for any of them. So keep that in mind. Thank God the water board's where they're at. Thank God the airport's been working in the direction they have, and they've been reducing some of their requests and funding. But there's really, for lack of better words, based on the MOUs, at least in some of them, there's no oversight for an open checkbook. I don't know how to say it any other way.
Yeah. Well, they have their own boards, and their own boards are their oversight.
Yeah, and that's why we need to look at the.
And that's why you appoint the board members.
Exactly. Thank you.
So, all right. So with that, we can move forward with the questions, I think. And then one of the things I want to talk about with the scoring criteria, and I actually met with Christina a little bit about this because of her grant history. I know our goal in this process was to create some kind of a grant scoring method to help determine the viability of organizations, which ones are essential. The problem with that is when you do a grant, you're writing a grant for a specific project, and that grant money is usually for a specific thing. So maybe like I'm writing for a new, if I'm Star, I'm writing for a new transportation bus or something to help in the transportation area, maybe software or something like that. The thing about grants specifically is when you're scoring on the scope of a project that's similar. It's very difficult to come up with a scoring mechanism for our outside entities, because how do you compare YWCA and the Conservation District? The scopes of the monies we're providing are so wide, it's hard to come up with an effective scoring method. And I did email you guys this afternoon a concept of some scoring that we could use. But one of the conversations we had, because I think this really evolved as we went through, one of the questions, because Bonnie's an accountant, so she wants to know all those detailed financial things. Like, so does the top scoring group get the most money, or and the lowest scoring group doesn't get money? I look at if we're going to use a scoring mechanism, that it's more of a tool in our tool belt, maybe a way to help differentiate the ability to decide who gets a 10% cut and who doesn't. And I don't think the numbers will ever truly dictate that, because we're looking at such a wide scope of organization. So I think if we could come up with a number method, it would help. And one of the things we've actually talked about in committee is, do we create a vetting committee that looks at the applications and then makes recommendations based upon because one of the things makes information based upon the information provided. I think if you look at the questions we're asking lots of questions about not only how are you providing services that no one else is? What are your goals? What are you actually providing to the community? We're actually getting more insight than we ever have. And if you think about it, it's the same insight we were all charged to get last year when we met with individuals, but we all get that information. So maybe instead of a scoring criteria, which I did present an option, I do believe the first year or two that we wouldn't use that anything for more than a tool in our tool belt. I would almost like to whatever scoring criterion, if we decide we do still want a scoring criterion, that we almost just score everyone the first year and see where the numbers would lie, and then make adjustments to the scoring system. Because the group I come back to is the Conservation District. When you start to look at, you could make an argument, how many people do you serve? You could make an argument it's 40,000 people, but you could also make an argument that it's not 40,000 people. And their services are so different than what maybe drug court offers or alcohol, that it's, how do you compare such various organizations? So what I'd kind of come up with and what I sent to you guys was just basically on the questions I thought we could score, how we could score them. But I think before we even talk about scoring criterion, based upon what I'm sharing, do we even really want to move forward with a hard scoring criterion now, or move forward with a form with a concept of eventually having a scoring concept, scoring the things this year, but more for information of how to, is there a way to develop the right scoring method? Does that make sense, Doc, and Mary, in a convoluted, long-winded way? I'm really good at that.
You know, I think what you're leading to, what I think I'm hearing, and I'm just trying to understand, is taking some time, because I sense in some way scoring at this point in time is not quite ripe. You know, it's a great concept, but maybe some what I want to say, testing application, like seeing, you know, have something that you think could fit it, but apply it where it doesn't hold any results of to the funding. So yeah, as I look at the scoring that you had sent forth with some ideas in that, it's still be tough when you put it towards to do to all outside agencies. So I have to agree with you. I'm not quite sure it's ready, but yet could we play with it through the first funding exercise and that type of thing? Always, you know, but if it didn't carry any weight and it was just like a test model, that'd be okay. Okay. Mary, Commissioner?
I would just say one question can resolve that, I think. Are you a governmental entity or a private organization? Because we are funding some, it might not be a private organization, but some of the entities that we're funding is simply a donation from the commission. But yet they're coming through this whole process. So there might be a screening question. Are you a governmental entity or not? Yes or no? I think that could, you know, help us if we have to make hard cuts off some of them. I don't want to start naming entities, but I can think of a couple that are not governmental entities in any way, shape, or form. And yet we're providing funding to them.
They're not governmental, but they're not private either, I could think of.
Yeah, I don't think you would have to say private, but are you a governmental entity? I think should be a screening factor. If they are, and we're helping to fund them, I can see where you'd fund them, whereas the others would simply be you're giving them a donation.
And I think Commissioner Tillman, I see where you're coming with that. And I think that list that we're talking about that kind of says, these are the ones we have to fund and how, and here are the ones that are our discretion. And really, when you're talking about those outside entities, those are at our discretion. And I think, and you're right, I think those should be the last ones we fund. We should be funding core government, in my opinion, core government, one commissioner's opinion, Roy, core government first, then taking a look at the essential parts of the components and then moving to the other agencies. And Doc's even talked about that, where really core government salaries, operation cost, equals here's what you have left over for everyone else. And I think that's where we get into that.
The leftovers would also, that's your leftover revenues, but you got to take your capital costs out of there.
Yeah.
Whatever you're going to do, then you have some money left over, and that's the anticipated revenues. And then the next question is, as Bonnie's always experienced in the past, is historically we've used carryover to help with part of that grouping of leftover revenue. And there's been years we haven't either, but for the most part, you know, most years we have. So then you have revenue, estimated revenue plus carryover to be put out to those outside agencies as well as component units. So you're exactly right, Commissioner Lloyd. I think we can decide the order we want to go. If as next steps go on, I think we've got one more meeting, the third Monday after tonight. And I don't want to make any decisions regarding scheduling who, regarding how, what groups are part of to be brought in first until our other two commissioners get here, because we need to hear that, what they're saying, so we can kind of come up with a consensus. So, but I think your next steps are right on. I have no I'm only one. I'll just say I have no problem with continuing to massage the scoring criteria. That's there, plus if there's anything else, and to see if there's any prudent application of the scoring criteria, possibly through the next funding cycle for outside agencies, as well as component units. I'll stop right then and there and see what you two other commissioners are thinking.
I think for me, Doc, on the scoring method, I think, it was my idea at the beginning. Hey, let's create a grant concept of how to do this from being in the grant world for so long. And then when you start breaking it down, you're like, maybe we bit off more than we can chew on this grant piece because of the wide scope. And maybe it was something we learned, but I think what we are gathering, whether we're able to score it or not, is viable information to make tough decisions.
Well, and let me share, I'll be quiet. Let's see if Commissioner Tolman has anything to say, then
No,
I'll-
I've said my piece.
No, with regard to scoring, right away that comes back to my mind is again, a rubric like we use in education. But again, when you take a look at how do we design those rubrics, they're across the board, straight up and down, and they're also validated through testing model by the teachers in the classroom. So, scoring criteria is a rubric and that type of thing. So that's kind of how I look at it. And maybe that's why I'm saying, hey, I like the start of it, but we need to work with it more. And that's where I'm coming from and why.
And I think until we can actually put something in place against the actual applications and say, this is what it would look like. Man, this is not what it should have been look like. Then we can make our tweaks to get it to determine if it's a possibility. Because I'm afraid we might find out, like, how did that organization become last? Even more than number one. I mean, and not that we want to skew it to an organization to become number one, but we all know functionally that there are certain organizations we provide funding to that even though they're not funded, they may be more essential than others, and we can just see how it tests out to me.
Yeah. So let's play with it some more.
Yep.
Over the year.
So what, Chairman Wendling, what we'll do in the next 2 weeks then is we'll fix that form, make those corrections that we talked about, and make those additions. And then what I'd like to do is have a conversation with Commissioner, and we actually had at the beginning of this conversation with Attorney De Leon regarding what are some of the things we can be asking and those things within contracts of some follow-up information before we bill. But I also know we don't want to change a ton of contracts at once. We want to do it systematically as a piece to make it easier. And then the other thing we'll work on is creating what Mary had requested. Is there a form we can create as a spreadsheet to give us a side-by-side comparison of agencies? So that's what our next task will be then.
And that will be tricky because some of us just want to get to the action and make it a checklist, and some of us want to write a dissertation. So Commissioner De Leon and I had that little discussion.
I think two of us have written dissertations already, and I don't think, I for one don't want to do another one. I don't know about you.
I don't. So I
Very
believe
good.
in
We're on the same
the
page.
KISS method. Keep it simple.
If it were a commission of 3, I think we'd be okay, but we're commission of 5. So anyhow, okay. Anything else, Commissioner Lloyd?
Yeah, and I just want to say something to what Mary said. I'd love to have a checklist, but you cannot gain the
I know.
information that we need to make that on that. So what we try to do is kind of come up with a balance where do we have some dissertation and where do we have some checklist? And I think, and since it is a living document, we may end up at the end of this year going, man, we could have asked this in a yes, no, once we've ran it. But I do agree, we want to make it more functional.
Very good.
So.
No, I think it's a great start. I just want to say thank you to Miss Berry. Thank you to Christina, and thank you to Commissioner Lloyd and Commissioner Tillman. Who else worked with you on this?
John De Leon.
Mr. De Leon, thank you very
Christina,
much.
yes.
We don't want to leave you out. Sometimes in the background, you're very quiet, but you're effective, and we forget about you.
Not in our committee, isn't quiet.
Oh, okay. All right. With that, is there anything else to come forward? Anything with strategic planning, Commissioner Lloyd?
No, I think that I'm just really glad we're seeing some tangibility come from this committee. And I think we've worked hard. And we have a lot of great discussion, and it usually leads to like an hour of discussion about stuff that has nothing to do with this form afterward. But we've solved a lot of world problems down there that hasn't even been on the sheet. So I really appreciate everyone bringing and being prepared and discussing and working towards this issue.
Bonnie and the committee, I just tell you what, I think all of us agree. It's better than what we dealt with last year. One thing I will say is we got a good early start on it. So with that, I think there's no other business before us. I do think we have another budget planning work session on the third Monday as well, which would be, what date is that? I guess, hang on a minute.
20th.
Yes, it's the 20th at 4 o'clock right here. And also just to let everybody know, I believe on next Monday, the 13th at 5:30, we have intergovernmental. Is that correct, Commissioner Lloyd?
That's the thing. That's what we said.
Yes, and then also tomorrow, we have our regular Board of County Commissioners meeting starting
I forgot.
right at 8:30. So commissioners, don't forget. With that, commissioners, if there's no more to come before this workshop, I will declare this meeting